Welcome everyone to our webinar on safety in 2020 and beyond. I'm Taylor Mulcahy. I'm the editor of the International Journalist Network, or IJNet, which is an online publication. We publish tips, tools, opportunities, resources for journalists in 8 languages. So we're in Spanish, French, Portuguese, Arabic, Chinese, Russian, and Persian. So you have a lot of options for reading IJNet. So the webinar we're doing today is part of a series that we're doing in collaboration with HackPack. It's a freelance hack series. Our first one was on navigating corporate and journalist clients. And now we're talking about safety, especially this year, which has been top of mind for probably more people than it has in the past. So HackPack, who we're doing this in collaboration with, they are a platform that unites a community of 14,000 fixers, journalists, photographers, videographers across the world. And they work to resolve issues that come up when working in freelance. So that might include sourcing, making payments, providing insurance and things like that. So we'll be posting links to both of those in the chat, IJNet and HackPack, and we'll also give you some updates afterwards as well. So we're going to start today's webinar with some introductions of our panelists. They'll do a brief introduction of themselves and their work, and then we'll go over some questions that we've prepared ahead of time and then leave room for audience questions as well. So I really want to encourage anyone who's watching to definitely post your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And you can ask any questions as well in the chat, and we'll try and pass those to the panelists when we have a chance. So thank you everyone for joining, and we'll go ahead and get started. So our panelists today, we have Christian Monterrosa, who is a freelance photographer, Aliya Bashir, who is a freelance journalist, and Elisabet Cantenys, who is the executive director of ACOS Alliance. So they're all going to be talking to us about safety for themselves as they're working, and also just kind of what we've seen in general this year and what we can use learning in year working during a pandemic to kind of envision a safer future for freelancers. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to our panelists. We'll start with Christian. If you want to just introduce yourself, sort of give us an idea what you work on. I know we have some photos here. I'll be sharing of your work as well. Yeah, so why don't you tell the panel or tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Christian Monterrosa. I am a photojournalist based in Los Angeles currently. I started focusing on issues of immigration and the Latinx community. I focused a lot on climate change, specifically wildfires and their effect on communities and ecosystems. And now this year, my work has shifted towards civil conflict in America and, the rise of extremism since Donald Trump's election. And yeah, I work on a freelance basis. I work frequently with outlets like the Associated Press, the New York Times, and EPA, the European Press Photo Agency. All on a freelance basis where, I find stories that I think are of interest and, pitch them to these outlets and try and represent, those events or that story as best I can with a camera. And these are some of my photos. This one is after the Los Angeles Lakers won the championship. The next one is during my time covering wildfires in Northern California this past fire season. The next one here is, what's the next one?
Can you see it here?
I don't, oh, there, yes. This was just recently in Portland during the election, and sort of the first time that Black Lives Matter protesters were starting to take the streets with arms. This was before when the Black Lives Matter movement started, first started or became relevant again in the news cycle. On the next slide, where you see someone getting arrested and sort of the clash between, the protesters in Los Angeles and the police, which is that one here. After the George Floyd protests, they continued for a really, really long time, and have only now started to fizzle out. And I think the last one, this was during my time at the Mexican-US border, once COVID-19 first hit. I went to the border to see how the virus was affecting migrant communities at the shelters. And I followed a medic team to sort of see what they were doing, what resources they were providing to migrants from Central America stuck at the border. And I think that's the last one, right?
Looks like we have one more here.
Oh, yes. And this was this past weekend in Washington, D.C. After a huge rally of Trump supporters at the Capitol. And afterwards, right-wing and left-wing protesters and demonstrators clashed in the streets. And, police, as you can see here, tried their very least to break it up. And so, that's sort of in a nutshell what I've been working on this year.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll definitely, it sounds like, even just see and kind of understand how safety is a concern and a thought that you're definitely integrating into your work. So we'll get more into that in a little bit, but thanks for giving us kind of a rundown here. So Aliya, you can go ahead and do the same thing, just introduce yourself and tell us about your own work.
Sure, Taylor. Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share some of my experiences. I'm based between Indian administered Kashmir and New Delhi, and currently I'm based in New Delhi. So I have been working in the field for over a period of 8 years, and I have worked mostly with international media organizations. So throughout my reporting, I have tried to explore the themes of gender justice, identity, human rights, in order to amplify the voices of women and advance the narrative besides the ongoing conflict in the region. But this year, like any other journalist, has been very difficult, so I wanted to sort of focus and move my lens beyond a single story paradigm where the experiences of people, especially in Kashmir, have been reduced to just women being shown as just victims. And all these the photograph here, I have just shot them in New Delhi. Unfortunately, I feel that currently we are just facing the problem of like bias towards women, as their voices are being pushed out. And I struggle with women subjects, women stories, and women protagonists. And I was not able to take much photographs this year due to the safety concern. So in the streets of Delhi, all I could see were like only men, and people would not give access to their to their houses or to interact indoors. So these are the these local vendors selling food items after the restrictions were lifted. And this person was a migrant who had traveled back to Delhi after the lockdown was lifted. And then so she's a domestic worker, and she was helping to feed the hungry dogs, stray dogs, because they had no food for like days due to the lockdown. So this was also a migrant worker who had traveled back from the village because he had no money, and he had left his family back in Uttar Pradesh, and he had come back in order to feed his family and to carry forward. So all of these stories were like only talking about like how to how to deal with the situation, in the similar way that people, were facing globally.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And again, we'll get into kind of the safety concerns about your work and what that kind of looks like as well in just a minute. But again, this gives us a really great rundown of kind of the stories that you're working on and things like that. So there's one more. And then, yeah, Elisabet, if you want to just introduce yourself as well. I know we don't have photos to show with yours, but a good rundown of what you're working on.
Thank you, Taylor. It's a pleasure to share this panel with Christian and Aliya. Thank you so much for showing us your work. The ACOS Alliance is a coalition that brings together news organizations, journalism NGOs, and freelance associations to advance a culture of safety. And in practical terms, that means to facilitate safety training, opportunities for freelance journalists, local journalists, editors. Let's not forget the editors, they need to be trained as well. Since 2017, around 1,000 journalists have benefited from these opportunities that the ACOS Alliance has created. We also work towards long-term solutions around safety, like insurance. We create relevant resources such as contract templates and facilitate coordination and collaboration with our partners. Basically, we're here to help. It's not enough to say that we need to create a culture of safety, but we support with very practical, impact-focused initiatives. And we always work in partnership. The challenges that we have ahead of us are much larger than any of us individually. So it's very important for us to come together as a community. And that's very much at the core of what the ACOS Alliance is.
Yeah, great. All right, so now we'll kind of get into some of these questions to start talking about safety, both this year during the pandemic and in years previous, because I know safety isn't new. And then we'll turn it over to the audience in a few minutes. So both to Christian and Aliya, since you guys are both working out in the field, this year we were working during a pandemic. So can you just kind of tell us what this looked like for you? Sort of what safety concerns you had that may have been different or similar to what you've been, working in the past. So what were you experiencing during 2020 and how did this look compared to your past work? And Christian, we can start with you.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think like everyone, nobody knew sort of the severity or the intensity of the virus. And so, everyone was, and still is, but on high alert, but more so when we didn't know how we could catch it or we didn't know much about how it worked. So for me specifically, that meant, keeping a change of clothes in my car or keeping a change of clothes at the door to my home, cleaning my equipment immediately after an assignment, regularly changing masks, keeping hand sanitizer or alcohol wipes with me. At first, I remember when I got my first assignment for an indoor situation, and it wasn't a hospital, it was just like a restaurant. And I wore like a full Tyvek bodysuit, and because I didn't know, what that was going to look like, or if I went indoors somewhere, like my chances severely increased of getting infected. And so there was a shift in learning, a new workflow with COVID in mind. And, actually that hasn't stopped. I continue to implement those measures. And I think, I don't see, I'll probably keep them going forward just to, have a good habit of like health and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I mean, if you can kind of talk a little bit about the things that you're usually covering. I mean, you're covering wildfires and protests. Like these things aren't new to your coverage. So, those are also safety concerns. Can you kind of elaborate a little bit on those as well?
Yeah, sure. So basically take those COVID measures and combine them with the safety measures that you have to take for covering something like a wildfire. When I cover wildfires, I wear the same gear that firefighters do. Plus, now this year it changed in terms of like social distancing, and it adds that level of difficulty because you try and be close to them for safety, because if they leave, you leave type of thing. And so it affects the quality of work by trying to do the same job from a distance or a safe distance. In terms of protests, that comes with a lot of anxiety as well, because now you're in a large crowd, in a confined area, and people are wearing masks and some aren't, but now you have to think about exposure and how can you keep track of if you've been exposed or not. And so you start, or I've started implementing like days of isolation after a big protest like that. I was recently in DC at like a right-wing rally where nobody believes in COVID and nobody is wearing a mask. So, and it was a dangerous, like tense civil conflict environment, right? So in those situations, you more so are concerned about not getting sick than getting hurt. And so it's been a combination of COVID measures with, these other environments.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, Aliya, what about you? What does this year sort of look like in terms of safety concerns as they relate to the pandemic? And sort of how has that related to the work that you've done in the past, and the safety concerns that you've had to face before?
Yeah, sure. So I think journalists are, always considered as, brag people, shoe leather people, who are always concerned, for the safety of others. But this year, what changed was, I was more concerned for my own safety. So that was a major change. And, it differed from other years, in the sense that there was an invisible, our enemy outside. And it was not the army, the police, or any power structure. It was a microbial structure. And so I think not to contract the virus was the first thing, to consider. And then following all the medical guidelines and revised SOPs would be always, top of my mind while going on reporting and after coming back. So I think what helped me was, keeping a track of all the institutional help, be that DART Center, IWMF, ACOS, Rhodipec Trust. They would timely, issue different advisories, these skill sets, and how to, cover pandemic, how to, distance yourself, how to take care of, different things. So I think that helped me a lot. And also I think the pandemic gave more powers to police and paramilitary forces, especially in the place, where I do my reporting. So, and because, the police and paramilitary forces exercise, greater control. And so I think journalism by extensions, went into a sort of suspension in Kashmir, as there was already, internet gag. And so we were not able to get to read a lot of information that was, issued by WHO when the pandemic started. So I think in a conflict zone like Kashmir, the practice of journalism itself, became a casualty. But yeah, Web 2.0, like that gave new directions to journalists like me who work from afar. And, I like, rather than just being just a, gatherer of facts, we sort of became like commentators and advocates at the same time. but we also had to be careful of the, digital security, fake news, and other, facets of ethical and online dilemmas.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I know you're mentioning some resources that I'm sure we'll get into here in a little bit as well. We'll definitely kind of put those on the back burner and really dig into those and explore kind of what's out there. But Elisabet, I wanted to ask you sort of what you've seen in your work, and how has the work freelancers been doing this year? How has that looked different, and how have the safety concerns changed, and freelancers in terms of needs as well?
I'm going to echo what Christian and Aliya have said. In terms of safety, the pandemic has changed our perspectives. I mean, before the pandemic, we started already to see how safety was not just something that was relevant for those that are, covering conflict areas or war zones, but the pandemic put it just safety at the forefront of everyone. Safety is relevant no matter where you are, no matter who you are, no matter what kind of stories you're covering. Of course, everybody's exposed to a different level of threat. Is very different to be where Aliya is based and where Christian is based, or where you and I are based, and etc. But nevertheless, COVID-19 put safety at the sort of in the face of everyone. We all had to look into safety measures. All the freelancers, even those that were not used to the safety conversation, had to get into learning what it meant to do any kind of work in this scenario. And this is I would say that the key thing that COVID-19 has taught us. There is no discrimination, just safety is a priority issue for all of us. We've seen it, for example, covering the protest Christian was mentioning before his work. The ACOS Alliance supported 50 journalists across the US to access a safety training on civil disobedience and first aid. And we saw in the application form how a lot of the applicants actually were new to the safety conversation. These were applicants that were telling us, I've never envisioned myself that I would need this kind of training. And for the first time, I see myself, not only covering this protest, but also in the context of COVID-19. So again, I think this has been kind of like the major change we've seen. I also want to mention, we saw how very early on in the pandemic, those that were covering the most challenging stories in emergency wards, in hospitals, in patients' homes, actually you realize how these were journalists that have worked internationally in Syria, in Iraq, in Congo, in Honduras. I mean, freelancers like Fabio Buccarelli or Francesca Tossarelli, they were reporting in Italy, and they were telling us, we are approaching this as a war zone. We are approaching our job here as we would in the same methodical way that we would do if we were doing Ebola in Congo or Ebola in, whatever, any other part of the world. So, and we saw how they were kind of like some steps ahead because they had incorporated this safety approach into their practices. And so this year we've seen how freelancers were coming new into this conversation, and hopefully, like Christian was saying and Aliya was saying as well, once you are there, hopefully you will stick with those practices, and it will sort of carry your work as you move forward, even if you are the exposure will vary. Sometimes will be higher or will go down a little bit, but I think that's kind of like the lasting effect probably of this year.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I mean, it's certainly, we can hope, right, that these considerations kind of stick around as we, as everyone's incorporating them, maybe newly, as you said. We hope people can just kind of learn from this and take that forward. And I think that's why having this conversation now, even though we know like the pandemic, it's not over, I think it's important to have it kind of in the middle as we're thinking of how we can move forward from here. So I think that it's great that we're kind of talking about this now. And there's plenty of lessons learned from 2020 that we can certainly use to grow in the future. So how have editors, how has it been working with editors? This is something I want to ask to Aliya and Christian. Have you found that editors who are commissioning your work are supporting your safety understanding like your safety considerations and things like that. Have you had to have different conversations with editors this year than you have in the past? And you know, were you having these conversations about safety before the pandemic, or is this something new that's kind of related to COVID-19? We can start with Aliya here, if you can kind of take that one first.
Yeah, so I have to answer this question very carefully because I do not want to end up in a trouble. But to tell you the truth, as a freelancer, you are always, you know, more vulnerable due to the lack of infrastructure in place. When I talk about infrastructure, be that editors, security teams, or other logistic support. So, and to keep a tab on journalists' location and to sort of monitor any harassment she faces, and then putting security measures in place for her is unfortunately a far-fetched dream. So, and I have seen in these months, literally, they were like, no one looking for you in any capacity, you know, if I did not take any help in advance or during the process. So I think being a freelancer, especially as a woman, so you have to make you have to sort of plan ahead. Otherwise, you are going to make yourself vulnerable to different dangers. And also the problem that I faced from the editor's point of view was that my editors are mostly based in the West, and all they know about the country was what they would read on the internet, but they were not acquainted with the local nuances. So for them, the idea was to get the story. They would say like, hey, you can do the interviews on phone, but then they would not be satisfied with the details or the angle, or they wanted photographs, which was not possible in the earlier months because the cases were on record high in India. But they were consistently asking for the pieces of information which I would be only able to gather during my in-person interviews, and I would be left with limited options. So as a freelancer, what I did in such situations, so I took some self-assessment before going into someone's life or world, and I had to take personal decision whether to go or report remotely, and then I preferred to mostly to work from my home and use all the communication technologies, which were effective to some extent, but obviously impacted the quality of work. But I'm hoping that things are getting better and clearer with each passing day.
Yeah. All right. And Christian, same question to you. How has your experience been with editors?
It's getting better. At first, just sort of like addressing the issue of COVID and safety concerns were few and far between. Larger institutions from the beginning have been good about, making sure that you have the proper PPE, masks, gloves, all that stuff. But I think it's a balance in more effort from the editors and the freelancer as well. Like us as freelancers need to do a better job of speaking up if the conditions or the terms of an assignment are not agreeable or unsafe, right? Are we getting hazard pay? Are we getting some kind of stipend for the money that we're putting towards this gear to stay safe? And if we're not, is that assignment dangerous or too dangerous to put your life on the line for what is probably not worth it in pay if they're not already addressing those things? On the editor's side, I have seen a lot of editors now say, hey, like, do you have the proper equipment for this? Or can we send you anything? But again, it still stands out as rare. it still stands out when an editor does that, because it's still not the norm for somebody to say, hey, you know, let's make sure you've got what you need to cover this. It's still very much like, okay, you're there, we're going to assume that you've got it. And then if you ask for hazard pay or some sort of increase, it's still met with, oh no, sorry, like we're not doing that in some cases. So I think it has gotten better since COVID started. But I do think that there's room for improvement, and beyond COVID, asking for, you know, some sort of hazard pay or further like protections if you're going into, you know, dangerous or hostile environments.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess like some silver lining there is that it's like starting to, it sounds like it's getting better, or at least that these conversations are perhaps happening more often, but like you said, not often enough. So before we kind of go to the next question, I just want to remind everyone who's watching, we do have a lot of room for questions from the audience. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please post them in the Q&A. We'll be getting into some more specifics on safety trainings and, you know, other like safety considerations here in a bit. So those questions are welcome as well. But yeah, anything that you have, please post it in the Q&A and we'll definitely get to those. So Elisabet, I kind of wanted to ask you a similar like follow-up question, but more, what would be your advice to editors who are managing freelancers? I know that ACOS, in collaboration with a bunch of other organizations, put out COVID-19 safety protocols for news organizations who work with freelancers. So what are some of the main considerations that this document suggests? And then kind of what would you just like say editors should be considering when hiring freelancers and like this heightened safety concern?
Yeah. Well, with COVID-19, we saw an opportunity here as well. And the opportunity is to raise awareness around safety and to use the opportunity to put that in front of editors and news managers, because that's, you know, who's going to question the fact that you need to put together safety measures when you're working, whether, you know, with freelancers or staffers. So we saw with COVID-19 this opportunity to say, okay, let's have this safety conversation. Let's put that again at the forefront of any coverage. And that's how we developed this document. It's called COVID-19 Safety Protocols, and it's very much focused for editors and news managers. And basically, what this document is saying is if you don't have a safety protocol, this is your opportunity to get on board. Use COVID-19 to get introduced into the idea of the importance of planning. Planning is very much at the center of, you know, what we are recommending in this document. But we also talk about things that are very important for freelancers, like accreditation. Accreditation is a matter of safety. In so many remote areas, especially in particular for freelancers, you know, you are not able to show an ID or to prove that you are a bona fide journalist, you might get in trouble. So again, educating editors in securing that maybe that freelancer doesn't have a press card, that maybe has a letter confirming that the journalist is doing, you know, this assignment for the news outlet. And in some circumstances that can be, you know, a safety measure. But we also talk about PPE. Christian mentioned this before, personal protective equipment, how important it is, you know, to have the right equipment, and who is going to provide these, who's going to cover these? Because we've seen an increasing number of, you know, local journalists being commissioned because of the restrictions in traveling. But okay, the fact that you have you might be as an international outlet or regional outlet working with a local journalist, still you need to ask, do you have the right equipment? If you don't have the right equipment, how are you going to get access to these, or how we can secure that you have access to it? That conversation needs to take place. Also insurance or expenses, because let's face it, you know, there is an increased cost when you're covering, you know, situation that may have, you know, it may pose a safety threat. So all these things, we're trying to put it very much as a prerequisite to professional journalism. And editors pay a very, very important role. One of the things that the ACOS Alliance has been very much keen to work on is on training editors, because we train, you know, freelance journalists. Actually, Christian and Aliya both have been benefiting from safety training courses it's not enough that we train these journalists. We should continue to do that. But editors need to learn, need to be at the same level, need to have the same understanding of safety measures. And this is very much what this document is doing. Also looking at, editorial value versus risk, having that awareness of, the profile of the journalist that the freelance journalist you may be working, has he or she had access to safety training? If not, how can we help that freelance journalist to get that access before it gets commissioned? So, I mean, the list, it looks like a long list, but it's actually very manageable if you are aware that this is, you can't afford not to think about safety right now. So this is really what we're trying to say from the ACOS Alliance.
Yeah, and I just put a link to the English version in the chat, but I know that it's available in other languages as well.
Yes, it's available in Russian, Arabic, Spanish, and French.
Awesome. Yeah, and so that's available on the ACOS website for anyone who's interested. And yeah, so now we can kind of talk, and you started talking on, Elisabet, is about safety training and kind of the value of that, and sort of why you would recommend that to freelancers, although that's not like the end all be all of safety. It's not going to solve everything. I think like it's a really important piece of, preparing yourself for these situations. So Christian, if you want to talk about like the safety training that you've undergone, and then we'll pass it to Aliya after that. And then Elisabet, you can kind of help us navigate this challenging scene of what safety training to take. So Christian, if you want to go ahead and talk first.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with the most important one so far. Thanks to ACOS Alliance, I did the civil unrest and first aid training, I believe. It was most safety trainings now have sort of moved to like an online platform, so it's a bit challenging to not have that hands-on experience, but it's still having the knowledge and, just if you have a first aid kit, actually going through it and becoming familiar with what's in there and practicing what you're learning on this safety training. Mm-hmm. I've also undergone a wildfire academy that I attended for 3 months just to familiarize myself with wildfire behavior, suppression tactics, and first aid as it relates to burns or getting impaled by a tree or trauma, blunt force trauma, just to not be figuring it out when I'm out there covering wildfires. These are things that I think all of us on this panel would agree are things that you need to be familiar with before going. And that's the one thing that you shouldn't learn on the job, that you should already have knowledge or some sort of experience in treating these kinds of wounds or injuries. And so, yeah, that's sort of the training that I've undergone. And, I'm constantly looking for new like refresher videos or anything like how to, I watched a video like a couple days ago on how to make a tourniquet out of a belt with one hand, right? In case like your arm gets shot and you're alone, like how can you apply that if you're by yourself? And that's not a formal training. That's just something that I thought about and wanted to familiarize myself with. And so I would urge all freelancers to, sit down and figure out what the best training for what they're covering is, and go out and seek those resources.
Yeah, that's great advice. Aliya, if you want to kind of talk about the same thing, the safety training that you've experienced.
Yeah, so I have taken hostile environment first aid training in 2016, which was by International Women's Media Foundation. So, and it was in consultation with TYR Solution, UK-based risk mitigation company. So in that training, so we had a first-hand training experience on the journalistic activities that included planning, risk assessment, emergency first aid, personal security, self-defense. And especially what I found interesting was, travel safety. And and I would always dream of, possessing these skills to be self-sufficient in covering the conflict, especially as a women journalist. And then I also got a training in 2017 with from ACOS, which was in partnership with New York Times and Pulitzer Center, and that also helped us to prepare for dangerous situations. And we could finally undergo through a series of scenarios, exercises that included real-time experiences, how to stay alive, and how to navigate considerations, crisis situations, and what if you are under threat. And one of the most important takeaways were just you have to sort of avoid the danger in the first place. So, and also it was a very gender sensitive trainings, and I think I would have never been confident in reporting stories, and which I found after the training. And I think those trainings are even helpful today while doing interviews or traveling, or talking to sources. And I think every freelancer, be that covering conflict or epidemic, this should be on the top of the list.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I think it really adds perspective to kind of understand trainings that you guys went experience, and also just recognizing that those you guys didn't do the same training because you have different needs and different safety considerations. And I think also we'll probably talk more about that now. If you can kind of give listeners like an advice on how to navigate this like safety training world, because there's so many things out there, and it can be kind of overwhelming.
Yes, it is. I think that the first most important thing is to know yourself, to understand your profile, what kind of stories you're covering and you will be covering, where are you going towards, whether you're sort of defining your career as a conflict reporter or, what kind of investigative reporter, a little bit to understand a little bit who you are and who you want to be, what's your career path. And based on that, I think you need to be very careful in choosing what kind of training do you need. The training, the HIFAT, Hostile Environment First Aid Training, the traditional HIFAT course that Aliya took, it's the most comprehensive course. These courses tend to be like minimum of 3 up to 5, sometimes even 6 days. Very intensive courses. It's a full-on course where it prepares you for the most catastrophic scenarios that you can possibly face, and confront you with these situations, and prepares you with potential scenario of a kidnapping, for example, very dramatic stuff. Now, not all the journalists, not all the freelance journalists will need that training. For example, Christian accessed another training, in this case was online because of COVID-19. All the safety training providers and the organizations that are involved in safety training saw the urgency to not to freeze and stop, but now the journalists needed almost more than ever continue to do safety training and bring it online. But the course that Christian took probably would be a 2-day course based on probably 8 hours of first aid, very basic, and then situational awareness and understanding of civil disobedience. And that was the perfect course for Christian, because he understands that these are scenarios that I will be confronted with, and I need to be prepared. I need to understand how I'm going to sort of move around, what's going to be my escape route, what kind of equipment I'm going to be wearing, etc. And also, very savvy, Christian also looked into a wildfire course, because that's, again, something that traditionally wouldn't be in a HIFAT course, because it's not a very common, sort of threat. But, he was very aware of his profile, what is he being confronted with, and he searched for that specific course that would prepare him, would train him for, that scenario. So again, understanding yourself and understanding what kind of course you need. The more extreme course, which is the sort of the HIFA, the Hostile Environment First Aid course, was something that it's maybe preparing you for a more urban environment, which typically our courses, again, from 2-3 days. I want to say other things. Don't forget about refreshers, because we train journalists, especially for first aid. And if you don't use it, you lose it. And hopefully you will never use it. Hopefully you will never need to do a tourniquet. So again, you need to access refreshers. It's not enough to do a course. And that's why Aliya took, the IWMF course in 2016. And then in 2018, she was doing the other course, because she's someone who's exposed to threats. She needs to have that refresher. Also, we learn how safety measures evolve. So it's always important to keep those, that knowledge afresh. So don't forget about refreshers. Ideally, when it comes to first aid, the recommendation would be annually, but otherwise every 2-3 years, it would be interesting for freelancers, for any journalist, to have access to those refreshers. No need to complete a full course. A refresher could be, a crusher 2 days, and you could go with that. Also, there is a bunch of resources and videos by partners, and these are extremely useful for those that are new to safety training, but also for those that have already done a course and want to kind of like sort of keep up to date into what they're doing. And I'm going to mention partners like, again, IWMF, we mentioned before, CPJ, having amazing safety advisories. I really suggest you to look into the resources that they have online. But also, the Rodipec Trust, the Freedom of the Press Foundation when it comes to digital security. Totem, for example, is an NGO that provides online courses for free, very much focused on digital security. There's a bunch of resources out there that I really suggest freelancers to navigate through to learn about these. When it comes to grants, the ACOS Alliance, of course, provides support, but also, this RPT, the Rodipec Trust, IWMF, Pulitzer Center, the DART Center, all these, please look at their websites. The ACOS Alliance has a list with of resources and also links to all these partner organizations. Most of the trainings that we do, we have a fluent, conversation with them, and we tend to cooperate. But I would suggest freelancers to look into their websites and learn about what they're doing, or through the ACOS Alliance to learn about what they're doing. And maybe my last suggestion here is that let's approach safety training as opening the door. I think sometimes freelance journalists kind of like, oh, I'm going to do safety training, and then, tick the box, that's it, that's done. No, actually, I think the moment you go into a safety training, then I kind of like feel like, it should change your life forever, in the sense that from now on, everything that you see, you should see it through the lenses of safety. And that's the true success of a safety training course, if it's really changing your perspective on things. So yeah, again, understanding your profile, understanding that not all the safety training courses might be ideal for you. Learn about, the curriculum of those safety training courses, and approach them as the opening the door to safety.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's really helpful. And I posted some of those links in the chat. And we will, as always, we do a write-up after any IJNet webinars. And we'll definitely have a bunch of links that we put in there as well to safety trainings, grants, and other things like that. And also keep an eye out on IJNet. We're usually promoting a lot of these as they come up. And yeah, there are a lot of opportunities out there. So just, definitely will help kind of point you in the right direction of where to look. So we have a few audience questions, and I also want to ask you guys about some other general safety considerations. So I'm going to start with like 1 or 2 audience questions, and then we'll kind of finish up with one more question about what you kind of do in your general safety procedures. So one of the questions from the audience is, what do you recommend to freelancers who may feel pressured financially, professionally, or otherwise to take an assignment without the necessary safety equipment or training? And I'm going to ask Christian, I'm going to ask you this question first. I know you said that sometimes things aren't worth it. So what would you say to someone who's feeling that pressure to take an assignment?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I myself have been in that situation of, I haven't gotten an assignment in a while, and now I'm, here's this offer, and it's a dangerous one, and I don't have the required equipment, for example. That's something that you have to think about as a freelancer very, very closely. Like, do you have health insurance if this goes wrong and you're not prepared, or you're inexperienced in that sort of environment? What contingencies do you have? And if you don't have them, is it going to cost more to recover from that injury or from that situation than it is, whatever money it's going to cost to get the safety equipment? And how does that balance with what you're being compensated? But it also is the responsibility of the editors and the news outlets to make sure that they're not putting freelancers in that situation to begin with, right? If editors see that freelancers don't have that particular experience, it's highly likely that they don't have the equipment to do that sort of assignment. And so maybe they should consider, looking for someone who displays that experience, or who they know has done something similar in the past. And if they're, if they want to give those assignments to someone who doesn't have the experience, maybe let them know that they're considered for that and they would like them to get the training. And when they do, and when they're comfortable, to let them know so that they can start giving them those assignments. It doesn't have to be a closed door if you don't have it, right? So I think it's both a question of assessment and communication between, the editor and the freelancer. But I do understand the pressures of finances, and I think freelancers should take it on like a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. Aliya, would you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, so Taylor, I think I totally agree with Christian. And as I told, like I have myself faced such kind of problems, and it's a very, I think it's a very personal question, and one has to take a judgment call. And as Christian was saying, you have to talk to editors, you have to reach out to organizations, as Elisabet was also saying. So I think just communicating is the bridge. We at times feel like, why should editors be concerned about it? But we have to try, because COVID is new for everyone. So we have to be hopeful, and we have to take all the precautions and preventions. But yeah, like communication is the key, I think so.
Yeah, I think that's great. And of course, there's no easy answer, right? You can't tell someone to take something or to not take something. But yeah, I think that's great. Elisabet, would you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I was going to add something else. I mean, I've been a freelance journalist in a previous life, so I know how hard it is to say no. The one thing I would probably say is that freelancers should not be a form of risk mitigation, and we shouldn't allow that news organizations outsource their responsibilities by working with freelancers. And that responsibility starts with us as well as freelancers. One of the things that probably I would say to those freelancers that, and I completely second what Christian and Aliya was saying, and definitely Aliya, you spotted on communication. That's probably the key, most important thing, having an honest conversation with your editor where you talk about roles and responsibilities, what they can do, what they cannot do in a realistic way, and what you can do, what you cannot do. That's the most important thing ever. But also I would say the ACOS Alliance has all our work, it's based on what we call the freelance journalist safety principles, which is a code of practice basically. And what I would suggest is for these freelancers to invite these editors to look into these recommendations, because this is not about you as a freelancer, as an individual freelancer who is overly worried about an assignment or being difficult about some demands. No, this is best practice. This is standard best practice. and that is sort of accepted in our industry, in our community, that this is how it should be. So I think, you know, freelance journalists shouldn't feel alone in putting that, you know, in initiating that conversation, and they can maybe, you know, use the freelance safety you know, principles as a way to say, this is not me, this is the standard best practice, this is what it means to be professional. To be safe means to be professional. And I know it's very difficult. I know I'm saying it, and I can hear myself, and I can hear myself as a freelancer, and it, you know, takes courage to put forward that conversation, but it's your career at stake as well. So
yeah, I think that's so important. And it's like everyone's saying, these are hard. Like, we don't, you know, want to downplay it and suggest that this is just like, oh, easy, like, you know, just have a chat with the editor. But I do think that it's really critical that we all have this in the back of our minds, and that anyone who is like embarking on as a freelancer just needs to, you know, at least have these considerations, and to try and have these conversations as much as they can and feel comfortable with. So I have two more questions, so we'll hopefully keep these last two as brief as we can. The first one is about other safety considerations besides freelance, or besides training. So I know that we talked about these a little bit, but, you know, besides training, what would you recommend to freelancers as they're heading out into the field? You know, these might be risk assessments, or, you know, things like that, and sort of so, you know, Elisabet, you can probably talk recommendations wise, and then to Christian and Aliya, what does your process look like when you're heading out into the field for your safety considerations? We will start with Aliya on this one, if you can kind of tell us about your own process.
So yeah, I think the present times require like extraordinary safety measures, multiple levels, like we all know from the, you know, at health front, you know, we have to be careful. We all know about the SOPs, like social distancing, mask, and hygiene, and so on and so forth, so that, you know, we do not contract the virus. So what I have been able to do in these months, I mostly try avoiding like having interviews indoors, or not to go to places where I feel there's a, you know, vulnerability. And then I think in the region where I mostly do my reporting, there are now like new siege, you know, tactics of police and, you know, paramilitary forces, particularly in situations of conflict where, you know, reporters are often targeted for work. And I think besides like, you know, the fear of virus, I think we should not forget as freelancers, and it's still fresh on my mind, the death of Kim Wall, which sort of re-emanated the fears that we all, like freelancers, are vulnerable to, because we all want those, you know, to pursue that dream subject, so sorry, dream stories. But like what happened to Kim Wall can happen to any of us, because all we want is like, you know, access to do those stories, and we can't, you know, help ourselves when we get, you know, assignments, as there was also a question from the, you know, audience. But what we can do is, you know, we have to, you know, try our best to calculate the risks, and like do our best to try, you know, communicating to editors, people who are close to us, you know, talking with someone who we rely. And when I have to go to places which I feel like vulnerable, I always, you know, take my partner along, because that way I feel like safe, and I'm able to concentrate more on my work when I travel to far-flung areas. So I think, but early, I learned all these things like during my safety trainings, because earlier, like I would not even tell anyone that, hey, I'm going on a reporting trip. But then due to some of my reporting experiences, I learned that skill, that no, we need to have a proper planning, and, you know, and other take security measures, because at the end of the day, no story is worth life.
Yeah, thanks, Aliya. Christian, if you want to kind of talk about your own built-in daily kind of safety procedures.
Yeah, I think outside of like formal training, some of the like real world measures or some of the measures that I've taken from real world experience are like Aliya was saying, not going alone. I've at this point, you know, built a base of people that I trust in these environments that I want to have next to me or close to me when I'm in, you know, a bad situation. We've devised, for example, like very basic hand signals that only them and I know, right? Like we wiggle our finger when we see someone had a gun, and so we're alert to the presence of a weapon, or we get flagged like someone is skeptical of us or gave us a weird vibe, and so we pat our heads, which means like heads up, you know, something is not right, like the situation has escalated a little bit, or we'll dome our heads, like time for a helmet or face mask, just to like keep in communication every 30 minutes or every hour and make sure to check in if we've gotten separated. And something else I was going to mention was the importance of relationship building. You know, we pride ourselves on being objective and like being flies on the wall, but building a relationship and rapport with people on the ground has saved me so many times when normally I would just want to be there and observe and just take photos and not exist, right? But especially now we're seeing this increasing hatred or increasing like hostility towards the media, towards journalists. And I've had situations where, you know, people approach me and, you know, hostilely and are asking like, who are you? Why are you here? You know, you're fake news or whatever. But somebody that I started a conversation with earlier in the day who was there came and said, oh, he's cool. Like, I know him, he's fine. Right. Because they know we've been able to have that conversation in a calmer setting of who I am, why I'm there. And so they were able to vouch for me. And I think that goes for just about any story or any sort of environment that you're in. It's important to, you know, build that relationship and make friends in a sense, because there's safety.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I think, really great advice. And we talked about that a little bit before, even maybe off screen, but just about the importance of collaboration and relationship building, like you said. And I like how you talked about working, you know, with others who are on the ground and just communicating with them. So great advice. So Elisabet, I'll turn it to you.
I think Christian and Aliya gave amazing examples of risk assessments. I mean, that's what we're talking about, not beyond the safety training, how you're going to implement that risk assessment and what it means, which is basically planning. That's what it takes. It's planning. So envision, start with understanding who you are, your profile, the threats that you may encounter for that particular assignment, but then start to visualize scenario A, scenario B, scenario C, and have a plan for all of these eventualities. What am I going to do? What do I need? How can I prepare myself? And it goes from PPE, but from also what Christian was saying, you know, that awareness and that, you know, sort of introducing yourself maybe through, you know, in this case, to the individuals that that he might be interviewing, he might be taking pictures, or, you know, he might be surrounded by, so there is kind of like building of an acceptance. Everything, it's safety. You know, he's building a report, but it's also safety. So risk assessments, and for that, I would really recommend all freelancers to check the RoryPack website. They have templates there on how you can build risk assessment. You know, again, a template, it's a standard document, but then you can personalize it. You can take and build your own risk assessment. So I would suggest you do that. Part of that risk assessment needs to be your communications plan. And Aliya was talking about that first, who you're going to be doing your check-ins through the assignment, who is going to keep an eye on you, and, when something goes wrong, who can be there to help you. Together with risk assessments, insurance. And again, I would suggest freelancers to check the resources at the ACOS Alliance for Insurance. There are, nowadays, we have insurance packages that insure any freelancer, no matter your nationality, no matter where you are. Local freelancers, local translators, fixers, producers, drivers can get insurance on a daily basis at modic prices, etc. So I would really suggest you visit the ACOS website and learn about some of these opportunities. Also with partners, RSF, the IFJ, the International Federation of Journalists, Reporters Without Borders, that is, have their own schemes. So, I'm not endorsing one particular product or another. All I'm saying is do your research. There are insurance out there that can help you to be better protected. So these, again, together with safety training, are things that you can put together there.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you. And like I said, we'll have those links posted. A few of them are in the chat, but we'll make sure that they make their way into the recap as well. So we're gonna wrap things up here. I'll give everyone one more chance to kind of close up. But before we do, I just want to flag a couple of things for the audience. So first of all, I'm gonna put a couple links in the chat to IJNet and HackPack, who we're working together on this webinar series with different topics that are of interest to freelancers. And so keep an eye out on both of our websites for a recap and for the full recording, which we'll be sharing on the website, on social media, and things like that. So, this is shareable, and like I said, then the links will be more accessible and everything there too. Also keep an eye out on social media for upcoming Freelance Hack webinars. We're trying to do a few more still, and these will be on a wide variety of topics. Like I said in the beginning, the first one was about managing corporate versus journalism clients and all the different challenges that come with that. So we really are kind of trying to cast a wide net on concerns that freelancers have. So definitely keep an eye out for those. So I'll post these links here in the chat. So finally, I just want to ask kind of one last question. Definitely try and keep it brief since we're a little over time, everyone, but just if you can give a really short answer of sort of in closing, what are your hopes moving forward? What can you hope that we learned from this year? And how do you kind of envision, hopefully someday soon, a post-pandemic freelance world? So we'll kind of reverse. Elisabet, I'll start with you.
Mute. Yeah. I think 2021 is going to be a challenging year. Maybe not as challenging as 2020 because this really took us by surprise. So in a way, we're kind of in this new reality, and hopefully we are very resilient. So I think we are entering into a new year that is going to be challenging, but with certain knowledge that we've gained through 2020. My positive message would be that with this challenge comes the opportunity, and I think the opportunity in this case has been to learn more about safety, to look after ourselves, to be more aware of how we can be better prepared, to understand that safety goes beyond that conflict environment, that it's something that we all need to integrate. It comes with professionalism, with being a professional, freelance journalist, a journalist, an editor, etc. So I think, to me, if I hold on to anything, it's that it's been a learning process, and that we need to all, the things that we've started learning, in 2020, we need to keep and continue to develop and investing in that learning path towards 2021. I want to mention very briefly that now in December, we have the ACOS Alliance Safety Coordination meeting. It's usually an internal gathering from partners, but this year, by popular demand, we've opened to a public session, and we have on December 9th, I don't want to remember, Wednesday the 9th, we have a session on navigating the new safety landscape. And it's very much going to focus on hearing from freelance journalists and editors on recommendations as we move forward towards the 2021. So please, come to follow, join us to follow this conversation there.
Yeah, that's great. It's sort of we have about a minute for this conversation here at the end. So a whole session will be definitely well received. We definitely need that. So Christian, if you want to kind of take the same thing, what can you use from 2021 to sort of help us move forward, or help forward into 2021?
Sure. Yeah. I hope that 2020 as a year in total has served as a safety training in itself for what's to come, right? We now know what COVID-19 is, how dangerous it is, how we can somewhat manage it or take safe measures against it. We've seen, hostile environments or conflicts rise up around the world. And hopefully we've learned throughout the year that, more training and more safety measures need to be taken place and taken seriously to be prepared for what's coming if it does get worse. And I hope that we have learned as an industry between editor and freelancer how to communicate better and how to sort of assess, how we're looking out for ourselves as freelancers, and B, how editors can best assist their freelancers and their network, which in turn will benefit their outlet and their organization, right? Because you build a strong relationship and you build safety measures that will in turn result in a better product or a better story. So I hope that, we've taken everything that we've learned, and I know that we've learned a lot in the last year. And I agree with Elisabet that 2021 will sort of be the culmination of everything that we've learned this year. And I also hope that, everyone watching this feels more freely about seeking those resources. Feel free to consider me a resource as well. I'm always open to questions by email or Instagram, like social medias, whatever. Feel free to reach out with any questions in any way that I can help. I'm happy to.
Great, thank you. And then Aliya, same question to you. So what can we kind of envision moving forward?
So yeah, I think like everyone else, this year was like very crucial in understanding the importance of self-care. Like in past of my trainings, self-care was one of the important aspects, but I think this year I learned the most important part from this year was the importance of self-care. And I also believe that empathy in the reporting has now become one of the most crucial values that we need to practice each day. Which means that we have to, strengthen this skill in both our reporting as well as writing to make, ourselves as well as our sources feel dignified and worthy. I mean, I've seen in my reporting during the past few months that, reporters were really anxious and they would not sort of, respect the privacy of the sources because they feel like, hey, as freelancers, they need to earn, so people should, open up and talk to them. But, I think empathy is something that we consistently need to practice. And from the conflict point of view, I think besides pandemic, we do not have to forget to train and educate ourselves with the general vulnerabilities that we journalists in hostile environments face on day-to-day basis.
Great. Well, great answers all around. Like Elisabet said, this isn't the end of the into 2021 as well, and hopefully far beyond that. So we can really build safety into our best practices. So thank you everyone for joining us. Keep an eye out for further resources, and thank you so much to the panelists. We really enjoyed having you guys on. So bye everyone.
Thank you.